Well, welcome to the teachings on Islam for our Labette Community College World Religion class. Islam is a very unique religion, very strong in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, Northern Africa, in uh, Eastern Asia, and in the islands here, right here. There are more Muslims here in Malaysia and these islands than there are in all of the Middle East. And it's basically because their population is so thick here. There's a lot of attributes to Islam, and I would like to help you understand some of these in the class and in this classroom. One, I want to point out a couple things. There is this half moon with a star. That's kind of their symbol. They're not into symbols. They don't like symbology, if that's such a word, or icons or statuaries. Those kinds of things are not something you're going to see in Islam. They do are okay with. They do use and are okay with the Arabic, the words out of the Quran. And you'll find them across the top here, again at the Dome of the Rock. And the word for God is all of the Allah are in these symbols. And they do not have pictures in their mosques. They do not have statues in their mosques. They only have words and sayings from their Muslim Islamic tradition, and they have a lot from the Quran. So let me just show you there are three main pictures in this on this slide, this very beginning slide. There are three very big worship areas for the Muslim faith, and this is the first one. This is in Mecca. This is the Kaaba. This is the block. This is a silk covering over a very old block made place, sacrificial area. You can enter it. We can't. You can't actually. But there are some pictures of that. And on one corner of this, I'm not sure where, I think it's on this one, but there is a stone, and people love to walk around it. They're walking counterclockwise, and they'll kiss the stone. At any rate, this is their number one holy place of all of Islam, is here in Mecca. The second most holy place and this is an open mosque, by the way, and so is this. The one in Medina is also an open mosque, and this is where Muhammad died, in the lap of his wife Aisha. And then the third most holy place is here in Israel. It's in Jerusalem. It's called the Dome of the Rock, which sits upon the Temple Mount where Solomon built the temple for his God, under the instruction and guidance, well, not really guidance, but under the directives and hopes and wishes of his dad, David. But those are the three most, and in order, number one, number two, and number three. You'll see in Islam a lot of times prayer rugs, and there's always kind of a pointer, if you will, and there's some what's called Islamic architecture, and this is what it looks like. It looks a lot like this, the domes, the way they're built, and point parts. The carpets are always pointing toward the Kaaba. And they are they are pointing to Mecca, but you could be in different parts of Mecca and their rugs would be pointed in totally different directions. It depends on what side of the Kaaba you are on. Here in America, we're way over here, and it points toward Mecca. And what's unusual, actually, like in Pittsburgh, Kansas, there is a mosque I've been to, and this a carpet, and the pointing area is pointing more north than it is east, and it's because they're going like as if the planes go over the top of the world and down toward Mecca. At any rate, going on, Islam is the second largest religion in the world, and it's the fastest growing religion in the world. And then there's some other statistics there of other religions. It's in Saudi Arabia. That is, Mecca is Medina. Here, this is the most important holy place is Mecca. That's where the Kaaba is. Medina is where Muhammad died. And they say he had a vision and ended up in Jerusalem. He never physically went to Jerusalem, but he had a vision there and ended up wanting to have a holy place built there. And there is a mosque a couple hundred yards away from the Dome of the Rock. But this is Saudi Arabia, where it all began, right in this area where Islam began, and this is an Islamic country. They are you can't get a job in Saudi Arabia as a Christian. You can't get a job and live there as a Sikh or as a Jew. In fact, I doubt if any Jews live in Saudi Arabia at all today. It's interesting. I just want to point out that the Arabic is one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations, along with English, Spanish, French, Russian, and Chinese. It's a huge and very important language. That going on, I just wanted you to see the map of where this all began. I was in Jerusalem and had the opportunity to walk down the Mount of Olives, and on the way down to the old city of Jerusalem came across this place, and it's just a kind of a memorial, if you will, for a holy man of the Muslim, as a Muslim of the Islamic faith. And he was a historian writing a lot about his own family, and this document, this picture that's about to show up is of this right here, and it tells who he is. And I just found it interesting. It's on the way. They considered him a scientist, and they have a memorial there for, I think this is where he's buried, or this is at least where he came from. On the way into Jerusalem, we walk down a corridor. If this is the old city right here of Jerusalem, and this is where the Dome of the Rock is. And right here is the gate we entered, and the Mount of Olives would be over here on this side, and this is a valley. And this is where we started, and walking down in that previous picture is about right here. And we're walking on down, and you see the next picture. Here, it's of a place, a building that's right beside the Lion's Gate in Jerusalem. And the Lion's Gate is where we entered. And I just thought it was interesting. This is a place, an eatery. It wasn't open at that time of day, but I just found it fascinating to think, oh, we're right here in Jerusalem, and there's a lot of Islamic things. A lot of the things are written in Arabic. Just to point out that 1/4 of the old city of Jerusalem is lived in and occupied by Muslims. 1/4 of Jerusalem is lived in and occupied by Jews. 2/4 are occupied and lived in by Christians, and they go by different names. So at any rate, I think just for information, and all that for your information, here's the Lion's Gate. It's an east gate. I mean, it's on the east side of Old Jerusalem. And with that, here is the actual gate itself. And this is one of the entry plates. I think there's about only 8 entry places in the old city. And I just want to point out this right here. I think it's interesting in some of these old cities. This is where if they were in a war, they could have poured from the side that you can't see, on the other side of the brick up high here, they could have poured boiling hot oil down, and it would come down and run on people trying to come in come into the city. And they would have oil because it would stay hot longer and burn stronger. And it might actually light on fire if it landed on the enemy. And here you find some slits, and what these are for, people can stand behind those, and there's some on the other side of the gates as well, but they can stand behind those and shoot arrows out at a pretty good angle, but to get arrows in is quite the other thing. So I just find those things fascinating. But I point this out, and this is an Islamic history lesson, if you will, about Jerusalem. Because during the Ottoman Empire, a guy by the name of Solomon the Magnificent, he was a sultan during the Ottoman Empire in the 1500s. He had this gate, as you see it right here. This is not original to the time of Jesus or Solomon or anything like that. It had been fallen down, rebuilt several times. But the gate, as we see it today, was built in the 1500s by this Solomon the Magnificent. And this is Solomon the Magnificent. And this is the picture of that gate. The gate of the tribes, they called it there, but we see it now today as the Lion's Gate, and some as the Christians would recognize the gate of Stephen. This is where they think the Stephen in Acts chapter 7 was stoned to death. But a lot of influence of Muslims in the Middle East and in a lot of Christian Jewish areas. And also in this, I just found it fascinating. Here's the Kaaba again, just a picture of it. It's inside Jerusalem. We're in the gate, just walking down the street, and I saw that and thought it was fascinating. It's all in Arabic. And during noontime, you could hear the calls out on the minaret, from the minarets, the calls of prayer for the Muslims at the times of day that they do that. There are several basic beliefs I just want to highlight. One, there's only one God. He is Allah. Everything and everyone depends on Allah. That's important. His last prophet was Muhammad, and Muhammad was not a god. He was a man whom Allah revealed his will unto, and the Quran as well through an angel Gabriel. Although Muslims do revere Muhammad, they do not worship him. He is not a god. And they would roll over in their graves. I mean, Muhammad was just a prophet, but praise be unto him. That's what they would say after his name is used. All Muslims, whatever race and whatever members of community they may be in their own areas, say Parsons, Kansas, or New York City, if they're Muslims, they're part of the Ummah. The Ummah. And the Quran is God's own word dictated to Muhammad. It was not inspired word. It is dictated. And those are very important beliefs of the Muslim. Muhammad is part of, and this is his family name, the Al-Bayt. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but Muhammad, this is his family name. And born in about 570, they're not sure exactly. They don't, people didn't keep track of things back then as like we do today. But in the Arabian city of Mecca, his mother died at a very young age, and we're talking like he was 2. And then he lived with his uncle, and then with his father, who died then, and then he lived with his uncle. And so he was kind of put about, and he was on a spiritual journey, and Muhammad was, and wanted to learn. And he was wanted to be like his uncle about being a merchant. And but he met a woman, but still he was on a spiritual journey in his life. And he found his spiritual journey really highlighted with the cave experiences and then later in life. Before he got there, he got married at the age of 25 to a woman who is 40, so she's 15 years older. He married his wealthy employer. Her name was Khadijah, and they had children, but they had no boys, and I think only one child actually grew to a full age and got married and had children. Their daughter Fatima, or Fatima, uh, married Ali. Khadijah died though in 619, and then just a few years after that, Muhammad fled to Medina because he'd started getting visions and sharing some of his information. People in Mecca didn't like him, didn't receive the message well at first, at least, and then he fled to Medina where he was accepted, actually invited at one point to come to speak to Christians and Jews that lived there. This just kind of gives an outline of his life. His birth, living with his uncle, his marriage, his first revelation in the cave outside of Mecca somewhere, and then she dies, and then he moves to Medina, and that's considered the first hijrah. He does die in 632, so just 10 years later after all of that. And there's several attributing factors. I'm sure there are a lot of factors to his life, but one thing that he did that people give him a lot of honor for, did unite Arabia with the idea of the oneness of God, and he got rid of all the idols. And so they do not have statues, they don't have pictures. And they really see the ideas of having such things in a place of worship distracting and dishonorable. Muhammad himself was illiterate, and in the very first surah that was given to him is a 96, because if you watch this surah passage video about the Quran, the longest surah was the very first one, the second longest is the second, so on. I mean, the first one is actually a prayer, and the second one is the longest, and third is the next longest, and so on, all the way to 114 surahs. In 96, the 95th longest surah is the one that he received first, they think. Messages were not well received, but his revelations, his teachings did catch on. He told people his message, they wrote them down, and then over time to build the Quran, they wrote them down, and then one of the caliphs gathered all the Qurans that were handwritten and had them edited into one complete, and then burned all the rest, so that there's only one. This is the one they accept. And they found a couple, but everyone's really scared to talk about it. And part of the Islamic faith is that you don't question things, you accept them. Most of us come out of a different area where it's okay to question. It's actually healthy to have a questioning spirit, as long as you're really seeking the truth and accept truth when you get it. But at any rate, Allah is the one to be worshipped. There is to be no idol worship, and no high interest. That's what usury is. It's very, very high, extorting people with very high interest. Muslims are guided to follow Allah's will by the Quran, which they regard as the unaltered word of God. The Hadith, the words of Muhammad, and the Sunnah are examples by Muhammad's life. And these are the three text types of Islamic faith. The Quran having 114 surahs, longest to shortest, and then the Hadith and the Sunnah is really a body of works, established customs with beliefs that make up their full traditions. And all three of these are what they bring together to get the Sharia law. So they don't get Sharia law just from any one of these, but all of three of these, the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sunnah. Here is a Quran of my own. A friend of mine was in Afghanistan and lived there for a while, helping, teaching, guiding in some government work, and gives the idea of how big it is. And half of this Quran is in English and the other half is in Arabic. So it could be about half the size because it's actually two Qurans in the one. But this is what it looks like. This is the Arabic, and this is obviously the English. There are 5 pillars of faith, or pillars of Islam, and they are very important to them. The first one is about faith, the second one prayer, then giving, fasting, and then there's a pilgrimage, and we're going to look at each one of these. And these are pictures of each one. Here's the faith. They are to share a certain thing of faith and believe it, and they are to pray the salah, the psalm, or the zakah is the third. It's the giving. They're about a 3% givers is their average. The extra is what they call it. And then here's the psalm. It's not swam, but psalm, and it's the fasting. And then here is the Hajj, where they're spinning around. They're going around in circles around this Kaaba in the middle of the mosque in Mecca. In their faith, their profession of faith is found from Surah 112, the first couple of 4 verses. I witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. And that's their profession. And they whisper this in their babies' ears. And child's life, they hear it in the beginning of the day and at the end of every day. The second one is about prayer, and as I mentioned, the prayer mats. You have this, then you have these mats that are pointing. So, and there are 7 points: the hands, the 2 hands, the nose, the 2 knees, and the 2 feet, toes. So those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. The forehead, probably not the nose, but the forehead on the ground. So all these parts are touching all 7 points, and that's what they're doing here. And they're all facing that notable Kaaba in Mecca. They're pointing to the Kaaba. They're not just pointing to Mecca, because if you're in Mecca, you still have to point to the right place. And in Surah 5:6, it prescribes what to do and how to prepare for prayer. I'm going to show you a little bit of that. Again, these are the prayer mats that I showed earlier. Dawn, noon, afternoon, evening, and night are the 5 prayer times for the Muslim. They are to do that every day, no matter what they're doing, where they are. At those particular times, they're to stop and they are to pray. So if you're in, say, Mecca or Medina, or a place where it's predominantly a Muslim, during new time, their shop is closed and they are doing their prayers. This is a sign that I took a picture of inside of the mosque in Pittsburgh, Kansas. And I just think it's interesting. If you want to pause this and read it, you'll see every time they say the prophet, and they'll say PBUH, that's praise be unto him. And that's what that's about. They have a high reverence toward the prophet Muhammad. And when they call to prayer at each one of these, they are in these minarets. They have speakers up there, and during those times, these speakers will project the prayers of someone. They might actually have someone up in there, or they might just play a track or something for the prayers. But they're calling for the people of Islamic faith to kneel, to prostrate themselves and pray. So this particular picture is in Nazareth, where it's in Israel. And then in this picture, I'm in Jericho. It is in Palestine, and it's just a few days right after Christmas. And I found it interesting that their Christmas decorations are still hanging about. Washing is very important before prayers. They are to wash with water, and if there is no water, they are to wash with sand. And this is where they get that from. And he's talking about using a restroom here. And so they have some very specific instructions. And this is inside of a bathroom at a mosque. No big deal, but you'll see this interesting. This is in the men's room. You might think it's a bidet, but it's just a regular toilet. But they're very clean people. This is about Muslims. They're very clean, and they're very modest. Those two things you can't deny about almost all of them. They will not shake with their left hand because they do the bathroom stuff with their left hand. They'll shake with the right hand. So the shaking business is something different for Boy Scouts. But this is also in the bathroom, the same bathroom, and this is where they wash. They get on their knee here, and they put their hands down here and wash, and they make sure all of this is done properly before they go to the mosque and pray, before they take their shoes off. They feel they're in a holy place, they want to be in a holy mood, and they kneel and they pray. And the imam may deliver a message from the Quran and speak on behalf of something that might needs to be said to the community, the ummah. But for the most part, they're there to pray and to worship and to talk to Allah and to hear His word spoken to them. But they need to be clean physically to do it. And when they do this as well, women are in one room and men are in another, because you shouldn't ever have women in front of men and then go down like that. That would not be right. And so they don't want to have any sense of impropriety. So they will make sure they're in separate rooms, but they do the same thing. They hear the same words and they pray the same way. Almsgiving is another part of the Islamic faith, one of the 5 pillars, and the giving out of their abundance. You greet your brother with a cheerful face, and charity is very important for them. And nisab rather, is the basic minimum amount, and it's around 2-3%. But they're also it's out of their abundance. And so they're giving their change and their extra. They want to be generous, and some of them have more than others, so they give more. This is during Ramadan fasting. What's interesting is there's more food eaten during the month of Ramadan than all other months, any other month. Not all put together, but just during that month. They eat more because they don't eat during daylight hours, no matter what time of year it is. When the Islamic calendar, because it's 11 days shorter than our calendar, each of their months, and then eventually rotate to different times of the year. We're always recognizing January is the first month of the year, and January is always cold. It's right after Christmas, and there might be snow on the ground, and it's short days and so on. Well, Ramadan for them could be in the middle of summer, or it might be in the middle of winter, because it rotates. Slowly, but it does rotate. Ramadan, though, is just they're fasting during daylight hours. No food is to touch their lips. Women aren't to wear makeup, and they're not to put anything on their lips. And they're not to kiss anyone or touch or anything like that. And the idea is being respectful and thinking they're going through their own jihad, which is they're looking see what they need to change and how they could be more pious, and looking for piety. They're trying to be righteous before their God. And then they're really respectful toward that. And then at night, then when the time is up, then they can feast and fellowship and have all sorts of good food, and then go on, and then probably eat and then sleep, rather. The Hajj then is the one-time event. This is their pilgrimage. Now, some of these people probably do it more than once, but it's a one-time event in their life. And they're looking forward to the Hajj because they get to go to Mecca and walk around this and be with lots and lots of people. And you may have seen pictures where there's lots and lots of people there. And they expect 1 million to 10 million people there at any given Hajj. And that, again, rotates because of the time of the year and their calendar. What happens when they rotate, this gives an illustration of it. They're going around, and they go around 7 times, and here's a stone. They can kiss once, and then they keep going around, and then the 7th time, and this is just to show that they're respectful of Muhammad and of their religious activity. They're doing prayers, and there's more to it, I'm sure, but that's what they do and where they do that. And this is a picture of Mecca. Here is the open mosque, and right there's the Kaaba, and it's like a little coliseum in the middle of it all. But there's, like, they estimate 5 million people in this picture. Isn't that crazy? It's a lot of people. A lot of minarets out, and they really are strong on their way of practicing their faith. When they're going around, and this is a picture of a guard, and then they put a silver cap or cap around this stone. It's actually, they're not sure what the stone is. Some people suggest maybe it's a meteorite. It's a black stone. It's not a normal color of stone for that area, so but they're not going to let anyone test it scientifically because they're not a Muslim, and they do believe in science, but they don't want people messing with their Kaaba, so it'll be unknown. There are 3 major sects. That is the different denominations of Islam, and the major ones are the Sunni, the most, and there's about 80% of all Muslims are Sunni Muslims. There's the Sufi, which is a small percentage. I'm not even sure. There's 5% of the Muslims are Sufi, and then the Shia or Shiites, and those are in Iraq. I mean Iran. Iran is where they are. They're not. Well, there might be some in Iraq, but the Shia Muslims are in Iran. 6 basic ideas of the Muslim faith, and this is on the wrong page. That is not for this book. At any rate, the 6 beliefs are the oneness of God. They do believe in the angels. They believe in the books of Revelation. We talked about the prophets. There are 25 of them. And they believe in the afterlife and the resurrection. And there is predestination. It's a strong belief in Islam. A couple things about this. In the angels are made out of light. I think that's interesting. And they're genderless. They don't eat. They don't sleep. They don't need food. And it's not in their nature to disobey. And you can get this from a couple passages there in the Quran. And then they believe Jesus to be a very highly honored prophet, that he is sinless, that Jesus probably spoke originally Aramaic or Syriac. And they're not sure what Jesus really said because they feel like the Injil, that's what the Gospels are, have been corrupted over the years. And so they don't believe in the Christian Bible because they feel like it has an unclear chain of transmission. That's their reasoning. Here are the 25 prophets that are found in the Quran and of Islam. Among the Muslims, they believe in a day of judgment. It's their day of reckoning. They're very strong on that. You see it in the Quran as you read through, and you'll probably have read that if you read the assigned readings of their holy book. One of the big things is their believe in destiny, their predestination, and they're very strong in that. They believe God is limitless in his knowledge. He knows all, even things unknown to us. Here is a picture of the Sufi, one of their religious activities. They're kind of more into mysticism a little bit, and they feel like if they swirl around, I don't know if these are dresses or what, but that's a costume type looking thing, and they twirl around very fast. And I can tell you what, if I do that for very long, I fall over. But if you twirl around fast enough and long enough, you'll get a vision from the Spirit of Allah Himself. And this is one of their things. This is one of their unique denominations. Back, because I want to point out this is real blood, probably from themselves. They're hitting themselves on the head, maybe in the back or somewhere. And these guys are just showing that they are devout followers of their faith as a Shiite. And the Ashura holy day is very important for them. And this is some of the dates for that. The Imam Hussein was a grandson of Muhammad. He was martyred on this day, and here's another guy kind of whipping himself with chains or some other things. And people do this; they leave scars. Yazid was appointed as the follower, as the next caliph, and Hussein disagreed. And they were going to fight about the whole thing. Hussein then was martyred. And that was the day that marked the official split between the Sunni and the Shia Muslim groups. But it is a day of commemorating his martyrdom. But many Muslims celebrate Ashura. And here's kind of the descendancy, if you will, of the caliphs. Muhammad being the first, Abu, and then Umar, and then Uthman, and then Ali, and then Hussein. Hussein was killed, and then Ma'awiyad, and that became the Umayyad Caliphate, and then the more imams followed in the Shiite tradition. And the timeline of Islamic rule is, I mainly want to point out the main one here, the Ottoman Empire. It's pretty long standing. In fact, between these two, you basically have the most of the time of Islam. And the Ottoman Empire, it ended basically after World War I. That was the last real battle of the Ottomans, and they lost, and that broke that. And then the empires and the Islamic rule is very different today than it was back in those days. Again, the timeline of early history, just the idea of after Muhammad was Abu, and he only was like a year or two. Then Umar was like 10 years, and then Uthman was 12 years, and then Ali was killed, and then shortly after him was the split. And it's been that ever since they've split. Just the last slide I want to point out is the hair coverings. I think it's important for us to understand how women are interpreting some of the Quran. In Surah 24:31, it talks about what they should cover in their hair, of their bodies, of their ornaments, and they interpret the ornaments as the hair. And so you see the burqa is more covering, and sometimes both of these would be called that. Burqas are more like in parts of Pakistan and Afghanistan for sure. The hijab would be more of what it is probably in America and other places, in the Muslim Brotherhood, as it says here. But there are some that use for different reasons. I just want to point out there are a variety, and there's not just one way of seeing them. But one thing we see in the Muslim faith, and I think we see this of all faiths, people are like you and me. They want a job, they want an education, and they want to do well. For the Muslims in Afghanistan, they're a little bit more tribal. They're a little bit backward, if you will. They don't like the women to be educated. In some of the larger cities and in some of Palestine, women can go to college, and it's not an issue. But it is with some, and it's more territorial guided by in those terms. But they want to get a job, they want to have a family, they want to live a peaceful life. I think that's what all of us want. And so we're trying to learn this. But some people will use the Quran and take parts of it and make it say, and they're not trying to make it say, they're just using what it actually does say and being very radical with it. And so that's where we get some of the terrorist group ideas. It's a small percentage, but we're still talking about quite a bit of people that do at times. But most of them in America. They're great people. Again, I think the best two traits that I would point out for Muslims is one, that they're very modest and they're very kind people. They want to be helpful. They want to be liked just like we like to be and want to be liked. So that's all I have on Islam, and I'll see you next time.